We have a very exciting interview with a jealousy and insecurity expert.
Is our insecurity or our jealousy based in reality, or are we taking old patterns from our history and being hypervigilant and seeing these hurtful things where there might not be any actual evidence of that?
Do I know everything? Like, is there stuff? Because I keep telling myself that he doesn't love me. But is that everything? Is that the real story?
It gives people some understanding so that they don't feel damaged or they don't feel distorted or they don't feel like something's wrong with them. And we can balance blame and shame by understanding the origins of this.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships. Hey everybody, welcome back to the We're Not Fine podcast.
Hi friends.
Where we have a very exciting interview with a jealousy and insecurity expert. And Talia and I were just talking like we did the interview and we kind of do this intro of it after.
But now we're just reeling with all these thoughts, and it was so juicy and interesting, and insecure attachment versus secure attachment, and just all of the things that go along with partnership. And is our insecurity or our jealousy based in reality, or are we taking old patterns from our history and being hypervigilant and seeing these hurtful things where there might not be any actual evidence of that?
Well, and it's interesting because one of the things that we became, and I can personally just tell you, I had a moment of insecurity in one of my friendships this last week, and it was really timely. Because I overreacted. I made shit up in my head, and it really brought to terms, which is what we're going to talk to this expert about. Shannon was such a lovely person to disclose her own experience. Like, this is a basic human experience that all of us have at times. And I got really mad at myself for being like, why would you do that, Doug? You're smarter than that. You know better. You have great relationships. Why would you have any doubt about it? But the truth is, we all have lots of experience that come into play. You know, the insecurities that I had growing up.
And trauma and
unmet
needs.
Absolutely. Unmet needs, not building secure attachments with my caregivers in the way that would have been helpful.
That's
I think that's part of the origins of some of this. But so we're kind of excited, and this intro is not quite the same banter as we usually have.
No, but that's all we want to talk about.
Yeah, it is.
And just this idea that, like, in the moment, you might be feeling this unmet need or feeling insecure, but instead of owning that there might be a part you're bringing into the relationship, what it often looks like is that asshole is doing this or that, or looking at this person or that person, or they're distracted, they're not giving me what they need, they're making me feel this way.
So without going into all of the details of what we would love to process about this, please listen to this episode and realize, one of the nicest pieces about being able to do a podcast with people like Shannon is that, this basic human condition, we just have a hard time sometimes talking about those things that make us feel ashamed or make us feel less than or make us feel like we are imperfect as human beings. That is not what the message is. The message is we're all human. So please, without further ado, enjoy this conversation about jealousy and insecurity, and please think about how this relates to you and your experiences.
That's right.
Some people are better at this than others.
And are you possibly co-creating a story that you don't want to be a part of?
And as you can see, Talia and I wore green because we decided green with envy was the theme today.
I didn't ever know, because I'm an only, that I sort of enjoy twinning. And like, it's
with
like,
me.
It's kind of cheesy.
I should probably get a wig that looks like your hair.
And I should get a goatee wig.
Oh, yeah.
Long and flowy.
Or just let your hair grow on your face.
I could just use some tape.
Yeah. Or,
You guys, this one's juicy. I'm not going to
it.
lie.
Yeah, it's interesting. We can't just do this kind of silly banter today because I just got really invested in this conversation. I just don't think we talk about, and because jealousy and insecurity can feel so painful emotionally and affect our lives, we're just going to stop talking though. Enjoy, Shannon.
All right, friends, without further ado, because we are... We have, not only is Shannon Bryant going to talk to us about insecurity and jealousy in all of these couples, which is something that Doug and I have seen in, I don't know, maybe most couples that
not
walk
only
through
most
our
couples,
door.
but really we all feel it. Like we've all had those moments. Which this is a fun topic for me. Like I think the word jealousy comes off as such an ugly, ugly thing. Right. Which, by the way, to our viewers who are looking at us on YouTube, Talia and I wore green because green is like symbolic of green with envy. Which envy and jealousy, by the way, can be two different things too, right? I'm sure you have a take on that, right? But I'm excited because we all feel that. We all, especially at various times in our lives, we feel a little insecurity. And a lot of times people will say, how do I develop that security? So I'm so excited about this conversation.
Shannon, welcome. And will you tell us a little bit about yourself? Will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Well, thank you both so much for having me on the podcast. I'm so excited about the topic, of course. And you're right. It is a pretty juicy topic. I think the interesting thing is we think that people don't experience this or a handful or randomly. No. As you said, a lot of couples experience this jealousy, especially with one partner or the other. So on one side or the other. So I really stumbled on talking about this topic on my own podcast. I was doing a talk for an ACA women's group, Adult Children of Alcoholics.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
And I was just telling my story, what it was like to grow up with a father who was an alcoholic. And I talked a little bit about my struggles with jealousy in my relationships and my insecurity. So I definitely stayed way too long in relationships because of my insecurities. Yeah. And then I ruined some good ones with potentially good people because of my jealousy.
God, I love that
So I
answer.
talked a little bit about that. Yeah. And at the end, all these hands raised like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for talking about that, because I thought I was the only one. I thought I was just that way and I was the only one having these feelings.
Like you're
So I thought, okay, that's what I need to talk about.
You're speaking for the people, but it is taboo and there is stigma around it. But so how would you, for those of us listening, how would you connect your experience having a father who struggled with alcoholism and your insecurities or your
and being
jealousies?
An adult child of an alcoholic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a very obviously chaotic and abusive environment. And, my father wasn't the type of alcoholic, like the functioning type. No, he was wrecking cars and wrecking homes and, being pulled out of bars, those types of things. And so, in the end, I was about 12 years old. My parents got divorced and he came on a Saturday to pick up me and my little brother. He had been telling us that he was in AA, he wasn't drinking anymore, he really wanted his family back. And he came to pick up me and my little brother and he had a beer in his lap. And I was like, no. And so I told him at that time, as long as you're drinking, I don't want to have anything to do with you. But I was 12 and he took that to heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't talk to him again until I was 25, and that was just briefly. And then I didn't speak to him again until just this last 3 years, which happened to be the last 3 years of his life. And we were able to build a beautiful relationship. But throughout the years, I told myself the story of, if my own father doesn't love me, why would anyone else? I must not be worthy of being loved by someone. Yeah. And so when you're constantly worried and have that fear, because it's all fear-based, when you have that fear of, I'm going to lose this, or this person's going to leave me, or I'm not worthy of being with this person, that's really when the jealousy comes in.
Like this person is choosing alcohol over me time and again. And also what I'm picturing is that it really ruined your trust in him and in people.
Yeah, I was going to say in others. We translate that. And, I think, Shannon, one of the things I would say is you're talking about an insecure attachment building, right? Like you're talking about all the things that we're looking for. Like you didn't know what that was. You were not shown what that was. So when you don't have an experience growing up as a child that your arena that you live in with your caretaker and caregiver is safe and consistent, we naturally don't know how to feel neurologically even about an attachment that is secure. The other thing that I think when it comes to like trust, I think oftentimes people try to find that person who resembles like your dad. I find a lot of times people, you're smiling because you've done that. But we look for someone similar to the person that made us feel unwanted and undesired in an effort to kind of correct that experience or have redemption from that experience. So we naturally probably gravitate. I'm guessing, I could be wrong. Maybe you found other alcoholics in your dating history that might resemble kind of.
Did.
Fancy that happens to the rest of us.
Yep. And it's really hard, isn't it, Shannon? I realize jealousy and insecurity are what we're talking about, but that's part of it. You're looking for that person to love you and to have it be different so you don't have to take on that deservingness and personalize that. I wonder if you might talk about that a little more.
Yeah, and the other thing that I also realized along the way as I was really working on overcoming my jealousy is there's a part too where we have this a little bit of backslide because when things start getting good, that is very uncomfortable. So now you're right. I had a slew of alcoholics in my past or people who just didn't treat me the way that I deserved
which is
to
familiar.
Be treated.
It's what you knew.
Yes.
Yep.
It's what love
so
felt
I
like.
would just go back to this is what I know. This is what feels comfortable, even though I don't like it. And I know it's not good for me. It's what feels comfortable. That's what I'm used to.
Yeah.
And
so it's hard to get out of that cycle.
What you were mentioning, I think that is so important to talk about, is that if your nervous system is set to feel comfortable with a certain level of fear, dysregulation, maybe a certain pattern of like needing reassurance or having some big blowout and then, whatever it is, you're always waiting for that second shoe to drop or waiting for the other ball to drop. And so if your nervous system feels too calm, what happens? Like that's when the anxiety comes in. And you were mentioning that you were starting to maybe have some patterns that had nothing to do with the actual person that was in front of you either.
Yeah, for sure. I would be extremely jealous with people they gave me, and that is how it is most of the time. I don't really have any proof. I don't have they've not done anything to show that they're untrustworthy. But now I've just developed this non-trust. It's hard to for me to believe or to trust in someone because I'm always waiting for that deceit. Right. And so a lot of times people will either come from a similar background as me, they have that dysfunction, or sometimes they are in relationships where that person, their partner, did cheat on them.
Right. Yeah.
Or a series of relationships where there's infidelity. And so they develop sort of that same thing of, we know how that works. Like, I don't want this to happen again.
Yeah.
So what do I do to protect it and prevent it?
And we're definitely going to get to all of those like interesting pieces, especially like there's, I talk to my couples about, sometimes, or just even my individuals that are feeling insecure or, mostly insecure, that there's a difference between I'm feeling insecure. This is something that I'm often feeling in relationships versus I'm feeling insecure because this is an actual insecure attachment and this person does not have my back.
Doesn't have your back and doesn't give you what you need. And that's, part of communicating what that is. Yeah. I want to know a little bit more, Shannon, about like how it is. You've obviously given us a lot of examples of times in your life where you have felt jealousy, insecurity, where it might be warranted, where it may not be warranted. And of course, that has an impact on your relationships. I remember it when I was young and I was just coming out as a gay man and I dated my first person and he was like playing pool and some guy walked behind him and checked out his back end. And I walked up and I said, "That's mine." And I was like,
right.
Where did that come from? By the way, everyone thought it was so cavalier of me, like chivalrous of me, like, your man is defending you. So his friends were like, I want a man like Doug. That's not fun. Like, I felt really insecure. I felt really out of control. It was not good. I would make up stories. And I, similar to you, well, my parents were not alcoholics. My mother had mental health issues, and there was some abuse in my household, some deprivation of like good food, etc. And so it was always, I have that same sort of tendency. And what's interesting about this topic and why I'm so excited, I do feel like I've mastered it. Like I feel like I recognize, when I feel insecurity about something in my life, and we're going to talk about this. Like, I have so many questions, Shannon. I just want to put this out there, though. Like, I have questions about, like, is it jealousy or is it just like annoyance that the person in your life is making poor choices? Because I have that differentiation sometimes in my own circumstances. Like, there's so many ways of looking at this. But
oh my gosh, that question comes up all the time with my clients. Like, is this something that quote unquote normal people would be upset about, or is it just because I'm jealous? And it's that not trusting in yourself to make that decision. It's over and over and over again. I could coach all day long, every day on just that alone of, is it me or would everybody be upset about
Shannon,
this?
you just got to where I know I'm a little off topic here. I love that you got a little excited about that topic. Because I often will tell people that doesn't sound like jealousy. I think you're just really irritated with that person in your life continuing to make poor choices.
Or like, what's normal level and trusting your gut and what is toxic. And I feel like that's us skipping ahead.
I know. I want to go all over though, but your energy around that, when you said you have this issue with people all the time of wanting to know, like, what is a normal response to some of this stuff? I don't always think it's jealousy. Like, if you're not getting what you need from a relationship, that's not necessarily insecurity and jealousy. It's that person may not be giving you what you need to feel secure, to feel loved. And that goes to all kinds of questions about how we feel loved. So,
well, should we dive into that?
Let's
even though
freaking
it's like
dive in
at the end.
Yeah,
let's do it. Shannon, what do you think about that? Normal levels, toxic levels, trusting your gut.
Yeah. Well, I think so. One thing that has to happen for that person, right? The reason it's so confusing all the time is because they don't have that self-confidence, because they don't have that self-trust in them.
Wow.
So they're constantly questioning. But once they get through and start working on jealousy and start working on their worth, their self-worth, and believing that they are worthy and kind of getting through all that stuff that's in the way, then it's way easier to tell, okay, this, you know what? I'm not going to put up with this type of stuff. And it's very clear to me that this is not for me or this is wrong. Right. So, I mean, that is really that differentiator of I'm probably going to always be confused and second guess and question as long as I don't feel like I'm worthy. We live in this scarcity a lot of times in relationships, especially people with this type of background. Like, that's my gosh, I'm not good enough for anybody else. Maybe this is as good as I'll get. And so then you just go, well, I guess I'm going to deal with this because I'm not strong enough. I don't feel strong enough myself to do anything about it.
That's so well put.
It is really well put. And it's almost like what we're talking about is mindfulness, right? We're talking about like being in the moment, listening to yourself. What I'm loving so much, Shannon, and I did not read all the questions beforehand. I like some spontaneity. What I'm loving so much that you're doing is talking about this confidence that really just listen to yourselves. Like I tell people a lot of times in relationships, if you are not feeling connected, if you're not feeling secure, if you have these constant questions, we just actually talked with someone not so long ago about a narcissistically abusive pattern of choosing relationships. I mean, these guys were fucking with her. And so there was ample reason to not feel secure, but she didn't feel comfortable saying, I don't feel right about that. All of her intuition was correct. All of her, experience internally. So when you talk about like that self-confidence, like listen to yourself and trust yourself and reality test that and make sure that you have valid reasons for kind of, coming up with stuff. Because the other piece is to say, and like you said before, like you've created these circumstances in your own life. We all have. Like when I said, that's mine, please.
Well, yeah. And didn't that feel different than like intuition? And so I think that's Intuition is something that's lighter and it just kind of comes in. You just know. Like I have this in my gut feeling. I just know. When you're saying, hey, that's mine, it feels really heavy and it feels very different than intuition.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Like I did not take a moment, and I was young. Like I was in my 20s. I was probably 25. I'm only a few years older than that now.
Yeah, you're only 26.
Thank you, Talia. So I've grown a lot in a year. And it's interesting. And I'm going to be all over the place here, but we had a person who talked about polyamorous relationships and how compersion is the word where you can actually be really happy for your partner to be happy, enjoying and being joyful in another person's sexual or emotional relationship. And boy, does that take work.
Well, and maybe that's the height of self-confidence and ability to sit back.
Be generous.
Be generous.
And be trusting of your connection with someone. Right. So anyway, I'm all over the place.
I'm glad you brought that up because I had a really great interview with somebody and I learned so much. They were talking about those relationships where you have multiple partners. And what's really interesting about that is when we're in monogamous relationships, we kind of go into it with this assumption that, okay, they're mine, I'm theirs, and they're not going to hurt me. Like that's the expectation. But there's also no conversation of jealousy. In non-monogamous relationships, they know that that's going to happen. So they have open conversations typically about what are we going to, like the plan for this and what are we going to do and how are we going to maneuver through it? Where in monogamous relationships, we just don't have those same conversations.
I agree entirely with you.
We should.
And everyone should, by the way, because there's no heterosexual, I mean, there's no, not heterosexual, but there's no monogamous relationship either where there isn't somebody who, you notice your partner connecting to, or you wonder if there's something else going on at the water fountain or the coffee maker at the office. I just think there's a lot of possibilities. And I think the couples that can really talk about this and check it out and not be bothered by it, because I think some people really get annoyed. I think it's usually a red flag when someone's annoyed by someone's like, I'm feeling a little jealous and insecure. Can we talk about this? Like you should be able to frickin' talk about anything, right? So,
but I could see it becoming old if it's a constant.
If it's a constant,
and
right?
you as the partner aren't really doing anything that you feel like would warrant that, then it would just feel like, oh my gosh, my partner needs so much affirmation, validation.
Yeah.
Shannon, you said something really interesting, I think, on your website that I was like, I wonder what this means. But you say jealousy is not the problem, it's the solution. What does that mean?
Yeah. So a lot of people will say, oh, I have such a problem with jealousy. I'm so jealous. It's causing this huge problem in my relationship. And so they're really, it's like a doctor attacking the symptom versus the root cause.
That's right.
So that jealousy is there to say, hey, there's something off. There's something that you need to look at.
That's right.
When we're extremely jealous, what we tend to do sometimes is think, well, that must mean that there is a reason to feel jealous. A lot of times when you have the extreme jealousy and like with people that I work with, it's the sign of what's going on that's, what's deeper than that. It's there. That jealousy is showing up to say, hey, you need to go look at the root cause, because really people ask me all the time, well, how do you work with people and tell them not to be jealous? What if their partner's really cheating on them? Okay, we're not focused on if their partner's going to cheat on them or not. I have no idea. Right. But why is it such a daily thing for you that's driving your life, that you feel jealous all the time, that you feel anxious all the time, and that you feel unworthy all the time? So that is why. So jealousy is actually a solution to something, not the problem.
And also it sounds like it's the flag waving. It's like the red flag that there is a deeper problem. It's like a coping strategy for a deeper problem.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I always joke about this sign that is outside our airport here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where it says, if you see something, say something. It's the same mantra. Like, if there's something going on and you're feeling a certain way, pay attention to it and evaluate it and figure out what to do with it and whether or not you need to or not. I'm kind of curious, Shannon, if you could comment on like what you see as common factors or triggers for people to become jealous? Realizing that's probably a big range. Go ahead.
So I think there are two big areas that I've seen so far. Yep. One is growing up with some dysfunction in your childhood, having a parent who hasn't been there in your life, that, you know, you kind of have that abandonment part, or they just weren't being the parent that they should have been, right? The second category that I see people fall in is everything was fine. They dated someone. They really were in love with this person. That person cheated on them. And then maybe they dated somebody else and that person cheated on them. Yeah. So they, you know, kind of started to get into this series of relationships where there was infidelity. So I really see those two buckets most often. It's either one or the other. And then it just starts to grow. What happens is that jealousy then becomes these insecure habits that they do all day long, constantly. You guys were talking about that validation and reassurance. They are going to their partner constantly and saying, I need reassurance. I need reassurance. Okay. And it's kind of, you know, my Facebook group is called Jealousy Junkies. I call it that because
Shannon, I love it.
Wow.
It is like that, right? It's that pattern of almost like a drug. Like, I have this thing that I'm feeling worked up about. I need it. I need this reassurance from my partner. They give it to me. They try to. They give it to me. And okay, that settles me down for a minute. But then I go right back into, I need that reassurance again. That is horrible and miserable for a partner. You cannot sustain that for someone for very long. You know, I'm having to constantly reassure you.
What it sounds like when you put it like that, like, okay, first of all, jealousy junkies, that is so brilliant. But I'm also thinking about this addiction model. And also, I know we're just about to talk about like brain chemistry too, but it also sounds like OCD, that in the absence of me being able to see that the, you know, my oven, whatever, what am I trying to say? What is that called again?
Well, like intrusive thoughts and compulsions. And
in the absence of me seeing that my doors are locked and my oven is off, I don't trust my own memory or understanding of if that's really true. So I need to be able to see it or do it with my own eyes to believe it. And it's just like, it doesn't stick to the ribs. That feeling of assurance. Well,
that's that reality test, right? You know, like you look for validation that what you're feeling is accurate. I got to just comment totally off the beaten path here. I did not think much about this podcast episode before because you are a last minute guest and I'm so grateful. Yes. Shannon, I am like fire inside about this conversation. And you are so easy to talk to. I mean, I'm just beyond delighted with you having been our guest today.
I told you you'd love her.
I absolutely love you and I love this conversation and I'm finding myself so like goose pimply about wanting to go so many directions. Because what you just did is so critically important because basically you told people jealousy has an origin that's very real. If you were neglected, if you were abused, if you did not get a good... You said it so beautifully, like if your parent did not do what they were supposed to do.
Yeah. Unmet needs.
What's so beautiful about that is it gives people some understanding so that they don't feel damaged or they don't feel distorted or they don't feel like something's wrong with them. And we can balance blame and shame by understanding the origins of this. And then also to say that if you've been in recurrent relationships where you've been cheated on, that's a very real experience. That's so fucking hurtful. Yes. You know, that of course you're going to be like looking in the future. I have a client, by the way, who I just told every time you go on a date with someone, I need you to tell him at some point, this is my experience. So sometimes I get a little insecure and I start making things up and I may occasionally need affirmation. Are you someone that can give that to me? And she's like, you want me to do that on the first date? And I said, yes, I do want you to do that on the first date.
I would do anything to be a fly on the wall to hear how that went.
Well, you know, if you see potential, know it's going to happen because what you're talking about, Shannon, is not an easy pattern to break.
No. And this is what I've noticed in some couples. I just thought of something that is like an interesting dynamic. And I always have wondered, is this the difference between being securely attached and insecurely attached? But let's say, for instance, like I see the woman, she's in a relationship with this guy. They're both divorced and have kids and they've found each other in their 40s. But she's insecurely attached and he is securely attached. And so what happens is whenever they're not together, her story keeps on going in her head about the relationship, what the absence of the conversation means, what he's not texting the same way, he's not doing this, he's not doing that, everything's changing. Whereas the guy, or maybe people who are more securely attached, it's almost like this out of sight. It could just be me, or it could just be what I'm noticing. But like this out of sight, out of mind in a way that I'm assuming, like for instance with my husband, I feel pretty darn securely attached after 25 years in there.
I have something to tell you.
Hold on.
I'm kidding.
Because I'm going to lose my thought. But so I feel like this out of sight, out of mind with the secure attachment, where it's like our relationship is sort of like I'm pressing pause on my storyline about Rob and I, because I feel like we were really good this morning when we kissed each other goodbye. It won't occur to me that anything would have changed and that we're always going to be in the same place. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, I love the word pause. Like, you have to just kind of stop that intrusive thinking that can lead you to go down a path of irrational, distorted, not based in reality thinking, right? So I kind of love that idea. And I think particularly when our spouses or our significant others travel, we're quite aware that they're away from I love that look, Shannon.
A lot of problems come in.
I mean, it's where you really have to have trust in that relationship.
That's right.
So,
trust in yourself, trust in them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you hit it. Of course, travel is such a big one. Going to work on a daily basis is such a big one. And, I share a lot of different stories about me and my husband when I was in my jealous mode. And I always say, should he have left? Probably. I mean, he probably should have. Thank goodness he didn't, and he stuck it through, and I worked on myself. But, it got so bad to a point where we couldn't go to dinner. We couldn't go to the movies.
Tell us, spell it out. Celebrate. What did it look like if I were taking a video of it? What did that look like, your jealous stage?
Yeah, it's so ugly. It can be so ugly. So I give some examples, and the reason that when I decided to do the podcast, I said, okay, if I have to be the one, and we talked about this, if no one else wants to talk about it because I understand the shame, okay, I will be vulnerable and I'll tell the stories that I know are happening in other relationships so people can at least just go, oh my gosh, thank goodness it's not just me.
Yep.
So, for example, when my husband and I would go to a restaurant, I mean, I was always on the lookout for any potential threats. And so I would have already scouted the room, and I would have already seen all the potential threats before we even put our name in with the hostess to sit down. I mean, I would already know. And so then when we're eating dinner, and of course, inevitably, we sat right next to, if it were the person that I was worried about, because that's just how stuff works when you're in that mode. But if he would look and happened to look in that direction of that person that I thought was a threat, I mean, I explode. It just would explode, and it was this huge blow up. He could have just been looking to see where the restroom was, but not in you talked about OCD and that, not in what I saw is what I thought I saw.
Shannon, we're talking about a very deep disclosure here and very personal stuff, but I'm kind of curious because I want to say two things about what you just described your experience was. My guess is that you started getting warm. Your body started getting a warmer temperature. You started your heart was beating a little bit faster.
Cheeks.
Absolutely. Like all of that visceral physical stuff that happens. But also, I'm kind of curious when you say explosion, were you passive aggressive? Were you direct? What were you? How did that get expressed?
So people handle it a couple different ways. For me, and what I hear a lot is, and this is where we kind of go into the brain stuff, but what I hear a lot is, I feel like I have no control over myself. It's like this other person coming out and saying what they're saying and doing what they're doing without any regard, and they feel like they cannot control it. It literally feels uncontrollable to them.
And maybe that
was mostly my response.
Yeah, it's like a righteous indignation that I have every right to be exploding at you because of the way you just made me feel. by, ABC.
And that I have no means of calming my brain and calming my body, right?
Yeah. I saw what I saw. You're not going to convince me otherwise. And I don't know how to stop this, what's going on in my body. That is how someone feels in those moments.
I mean, what an incredible perspective, too, to have come from this place where you're saying, I was hypervigilant. I was always assessing all of the potential threats because you didn't say this, but what I'm hearing is like, my whole nervous system knew with 100% certainty that it was just going to take one beautiful woman that he happened to see in passing that's going to destroy our whole lives. So I have to prepare for that or make sure that never happens.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier too. Like you said, he should have left, which I'm not going to suggest. I think was the case. I think there's recovery, right? And I just want to talk about that a little bit. And I'm sure you're going to add on to this as well. But I think in a circumstance like that where I admit I recently did this with a friend and I was sarcastic and I was Talia knows this. I was passive aggressive. I'm like, yeah, just go do this then. And I was just like not great. This person and I worked it out just last night. And I said, I'm so sorry. Like I got into this weird. It's the repair. But, I want to just tell our viewers and our listeners, the reality is you get to recover. You get to say, I am sorry that happened. I felt out of control. I am working on it. And to help start working on regulating yourself. Like, I loved what you said. Like, it feels like there's no other path other than to like, rah, right? And just go after that person. Like, I saw what I saw. I know what that was.
You're doing this to me and everyone else is a threat.
And of course you're doing something on the side that's going to betray my trust and hurt me. So I'm going to kick it off at the pass. I'm going to head it off and I'm going to destroy this first.
But you know what I kind of love is that like, I think it's important for people to see like all three of us are professionals. Like, and you just said, I've mastered this, right? But what that also means isn't that you're perfect in every way all the time.
Correct.
It means that you can sit for a moment and be like, oh, did I just fall into an old pattern? I've got some self-awareness. Because this is what I say in every episode, right? Like, is it our fault that our dad was an alcoholic and I developed these patterns or I have unmet needs or that I was abused or that I'm hypervigilant looking for threats? No. It's an explanation, but also the second you're aware of it, it's your responsibility to own it and try to figure out ways to grow and heal and be a better
just be better
partner to yourself and to whomever
absolutely
you're with.
Yeah. And that's really where you want to get to is that self-awareness. I think, forever, for many years, for decades, I went through going, that's just me. That's what's going to happen in that circumstance. And that's how I'm going to respond. And, I think the reason my husband did stay is because he saw, okay, she's working on this and it might be slow, but I can see some changes. And part of that is, and what you have to work on first is like those three things of what you think, do, and say. Even just going through a quick exercise of thinking of the things that I would say to him on a daily basis of, the flippant comments, like if he would try to tell me a story about something that happened a while ago and I didn't remember right away, I'd go, oh, that must have been your other girlfriend. Or, it's those little
jabs, those little
It's not
pokes.
something really nasty, but those little jabs that I was doing constantly. And then when you start looking at what other things am I saying? What all things am I saying? I think people don't realize and how often I am saying those
because
things
it's also
my partner.
this is your internal dialogue that you're narrating out loud. Yeah, that's really powerful.
But here's what I would say about that. I mean, first of all, you have the ability to have that awareness that you're doing it, which I think is really half the battle.
Yes.
But then the question is also, and this goes back to something we've already talked about, which is like reality testing. Are you really not getting? By the way, there are people cheating and lying on people all the time.
Right.
So the reality is that that intuition that you have should be paid attention to, like you said before. But Shannon, this is also what I think. I have, with this person that I said on your first date, let them know this is a challenge for you. You've been betrayed by dudes before, including your dad. And so, what you need during that time. And I come up with usually like, is there a word? Is there a signal that you can give that you're starting to feel that heat and you're starting to feel that like pressure that you just want to explode and say, what the fuck are you doing? I saw you look at her or him. Yeah. But there's a part of this, Shannon, that if you can, and I told this person, I said, let's come up with a word that can let him know you're feeling insecure and he can do what he needs to do to affirm you. Like touch your knee and say, everything's good. We're solid. There's nothing going on.
Right.
Like there's ways of working on this as a couple that I think are maybe seemingly so contrived for some people. But it's okay to ask for what you need. It can be a game changer to know that person sees you, hears you, doesn't roll their eyes like, oh, here she is again, getting jealous. Right. Your husband did not do that. Like he might have thought that at times, like, okay, so she's doing it again for no reason. But he found a way to say, I know what I'm getting. She's working on it. Yes. And all I have to do is say, I love you. I'm in this with you. Right?
Yeah. And, I wish it were really that beautiful, that he said it that beautifully the whole time.
Right.
Took a while to get there. There were some other, conversations in there when it was really bad. But yes, I mean, it is also, you were talking about triggers and like what would trigger somebody. And I always say, and this wasn't something that I created, but using those as a prompt. So instead of like it being a trigger, this is a prompt for me to do something different. Like, this is telling me, okay, here that feeling is. This is what I always do. What can I do differently?
Brilliant.
And one of one of the part, of them understanding how that amygdala and the cortex are talking to each other.
Yes.
Just that alone helps to explain just a little bit of, okay, how do I do something different in this moment? How do I use that as a prompt instead?
Well, let's talk about the amygdala. In case, because I feel like the amygdala is such a huge player in our brain, like that hind brain, fight or flight, perceiving threats, dysregulating. It's our anxiety, our rage, our fear. It's like caveman, cavewoman vibe.
Like polyvagal theory.
Yeah, tell people that don't know. Yeah.
I mean, it's really about calming that part of your brain and recognizing that there is a part of your brain that is responding to that external stimulus. And the goal is to calm. Yeah. The goal is to recognize I'm aroused right now. It's kind of like when I tell people, and I'm not great at this because I'm a kind of an explosive talker. Like oftentimes, one of my buddies who I have these issues with that I'm working through sometimes, like he'll say, why are you yelling? I'm like, I don't know.
I'm not yelling.
I don't even.
Is that what you say?
No, I say, I don't know. I don't know. So I usually back up and I'm like, all right, just take a second here. But I think I'm yelling because I think most people yell because they don't know that they're getting heard. But it kind of goes with this whole thing. Like you feel like, you're dysregulated. So yes, what we're talking about, and please feel free to expand on this, but the part of our brain that we need to calm. And it's kind of like DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, that whole wise mind idea. Like you're trying to get your brain into a place where you are logically and rationally thinking. Please feel free to elaborate.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I explain it. I try to keep it, just very simple of thinking, okay, think of that as your seeing eye dog in a way. Like this dog is looking, it's your protector. It's looking for any signs of those things that are really important to you, those threats, those things that are going to trigger you or that might cause you damage now. Yeah. And it's hyper aware.
That's right.
And so when it sees something that might have just even the slightest, similarity to something that's happened again, you're going to get that sensation. You're going to get that worked up feeling. But knowing like, well, wait a second, you've got that cortex that's going to try to figure it out. Like, is this for sure? Is this not for sure?
Right.
And so just trying to lengthen that space between like when that initial trigger happens and then your response, because that's what's going to make the difference between a reaction and a response out of you. And so that trying pause. To extend that time,
I love
going,
it.
okay, wait a second. It doesn't make it true. Just because I'm feeling this way in my body doesn't make it that it's truth, that it's really happening.
And another dynamic that I think is really interesting is like on the flip side, like, and of course we've never met your lovely husband, but it's just like in this insecure attachment.
He's our guest next week.
Yes, next week we're going to hear his. No, but what I was thinking, like an interesting part of the dynamic is also that
it gives people some understanding so that they don't feel damaged or they don't feel distorted or they don't feel like something's wrong with them. And we can balance blame and shame by understanding the origins of this.
The triggers are what will happen to that person sometimes is they start to be walking on eggshells or start to feel like they don't want to tell you anything about some interaction they had or anything that might trigger it. And so they start to become a little sketchy or avoidant or withholding. You know what I mean?
I do.
Like, not that they were ever doing anything to begin with, but that dynamic is so scary, probably for both of you, that people start withholding and withdrawing.
Yeah, the whole like, well, if they're going to lie about that, what else are they lying about?
That's right.
I hear that so often, but it's because their partner's like, it was nothing, but I can't possibly tell you that this happened, this little encounter, or that I happened to sit next to this person at a work lunch, or, you know, those minor things. It does start to change the partner. And that's when it really becomes something that you've got to look at when you're feeling that way every day. And now it's starting to change your partner to where they're withholding because they don't want to go down that path. And then the jealousy sufferer looks at that as like, see, you are a liar.
That's exactly. So, we see that a lot.
We see that a lot, and what an unfortunate reality that is. And as I tell people, because I have a lot, you know, exactly what you said, Shannon, there's a lot of people that come in and they're like, I don't even want to tell her or him because they have this reactivity. And I'm like, well, you have to keep being transparent and honest to avoid, you know, them later coming exactly what you said, you know, coming back and saying, see, you're not telling me the truth. You're not being transparent. And I truly believe, by the way, I believe in 100% transparency in relationships. And so even if if your husband came home and said, I got to just tell you, Shannon, there is a woman coming on to me at work in my office. And so, you know, I think the reality of like some circumstances like that, it's good to talk about, right? It's kind of like when I remember when I was doing training, and it's slightly different, but when I was in my internship and my practicum, I remember finding one of my clients like irresistible. He was so freaking sexy and attractive and kind of flirting with me. And I'm like, I don't think I can see you anymore. Put your legs together and please wear underwear. Anyway,
I'm referring you. Please put your legs together and please wear underwear.
That was what I was thinking, because he wore really baggy shorts and I could see everything.
Wow.
So that period, you know, that's by the way, a deterrent to try to talk about what's really, you know, going on for you. Let's distract from the real issues. But it's interesting because when you can talk openly and honestly, you can work through that stuff. And so like somebody to be able to say, I don't want to tell you everything because I don't want to keep triggering you and hurting you and whatnot, but I don't know how to tell you about my travels and this great person that I spent time with, right?
Or like, I want to partner with you, or there's some weird boundary that popped up and like, I want to brainstorm it with you and let's put our heads together, you know?
And I know I just want to keep going on this a little bit. You know, Shannon, you're a beautiful woman, obviously. And so there's a part of this that your husband should assume that at some point, some dude or some woman is going to like find you attractive and be like, wow, you're really beautiful. Or, you know, because of your warmth and by the way, as therapists, right? Like we have this weird sort of countertransference and transference going on in our relationships. But the whole kind of countertransference experience with like people who see us as warm and kind, we're not always that person. You know, some of my clients have been watching the podcast and they're like, oh, I didn't know that about you. I'm like, yeah, I'm not great.
That's more than they wanted to know.
You know, because they idealize who we are as these warm, compassionate people. We're not all the time.
Yeah. Well, so, I am. You're not.
Yeah, you're not all the time. I can confirm that.
Just kidding.
But Shannon, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about this process by which both parties have to play a role in continuing this awareness and this communication and this navigation of these difficult moments, and it can come at weird surprises. I also want to say something, and I could talk for days about this, but, you know, just because there's this phrase, once a cheater, always a cheater, fuck that. That's not true. You know, because, thank you, Shannon. Because, you know, the reality is I always tell people if you can figure out why you did it, you can apologize sincerely and then you never do it again, you're going to succeed. But you really have to understand the underlying pieces of where this comes from. Similar to jealousy, like the person who's jealous. Is it your family of origin? Is it a history of insecure attachment building? Is it that you do have consistent patterns of dating people who cheat?
Right. So you got to own your shit.
Yeah, you own your shit.
Well, and sometimes it is the jealous person who was the cheater before. Right. Then they're projecting that onto their partner. So a lot of times, I mean, that's a question I have to ask people sometimes, like, well, have you cheated in relationships?
Like if you're always if you're accusing your partner consistently, it might be you. Yeah. Well, you're having those thoughts,
it could
right?
Yes.
Yeah, it could be. Mm-hmm. Well put.
It could be.
Yeah.
Well, and how do you think that jealousy impacts our well-being and our self-esteem?
Well, I think, one, it certainly affects your health. You guys know, I mean, that constant anxiety. I mean, when your anxiety goes up, your blood sugar level goes up, everything just gets out of whack. And when you are that having that daily anxiety, that's ongoing stress in your body. So one, just out of the gate, it's just super unhealthy. The other part is I find, when you're someone who's jealous, you're constantly focused on your partner.
Yep.
So there's no way you're not present with your kids. You're not present at work.
Wow.
You're not present with your family because no matter what, and I remember this, I would go to the mall and I would get so anxious at the mall, so stressed out at the mall, wondering what he was doing at home, that I would leave. So I couldn't even enjoy going to lunch with my friends and going shopping because I just had to get back home and make sure that there was, there's no funny business going on.
Oh,
so
what a terrible feeling.
It's that type of, where it just really, takes the joy out of, and it certainly stopped, I said, we stopped going to dinners. We stopped going to movies. So then you're taking your own joy out of your life. Like I stopped doing the things that I even like to do.
That's right.
I used to love going to the pool and going to the beach. Yeah, no way.
It is amazing what we make up in our heads. And I want to talk about the physiological piece too of cortisol. So of course, stress builds cortisol. It affects your sleep. It affects your weight gain and appetite. It affects so many different parts of our well-being. And our physical health is absolutely impacted. Shannon, I have a personal question for you. Do you still find yourself insecure and jealous?
Yes. I am very open with this.
Yes, you're working on it.
Her.
Work in progress.
I love her.
I know.
Anyway, keep going.
So I did an episode, it was a year ago. So every year my husband has a conference and it's always somewhere amazing. One year it was in Costa Rica. And I had an absolute old, all that old stuff came back up for whatever, well, not for whatever reason. I know exactly why, but it was all the naked butts on the beach. And so we happened to be walking right behind this woman and it was walking behind her and behind. And so I went old school back into, my normal thing. And I had a kind of a mini meltdown right there on the beach. And at that time, I came back to the hotel and I was like, I have to give this whole podcasting thing up. I can't be a coach to people who are jealous. I just had this huge meltdown. There's no way. I am not the right person to do this. Oh. And my husband was like, even more.
Yes, even more. Because you are a pioneer in that owning your shit and noticing the ugly parts of ourselves that we're working on. No one is better at being a pioneer in this and talking about the vulnerable parts than someone who really struggles.
Yeah. So it's not life altering anymore. We're going to dinners, we're going to the movie, we can go, anywhere. And most of the time, it's totally fine. But there are those times where it creeps back up. And now I just have to look at it this is there to tell me something. Is there something new that I can create out of this for other people that are struggling? Or is this just to remind me of how that feels? Because sometimes I think it's really important to be able to go back to that feeling and go, oh, I can 100% relate to how you're feeling right now. I can actually feel it in my body as you're describing it.
It's incredible. And I think it's this brilliant, take a pause. It's that moment of self-reflection. And then also bring us to the tips and tricks. Like if we have this moment of self-awareness and we're like, ew, it might be more me than it is you, then like what do we do to manage it? I know you're talking about mindfulness and what else?
Well, and Shannon, I just want to go to what you just said, this example of like being in Costa Rica, seeing all the naked butts and seeing your partner look at those naked butts, which by the way, I just want to tell everybody, nobody is dead until they're dead. And so
everyone
all of
should
us
be looking at those butts.
You know, no matter if I'm in a relationship, I'm going to check out men and women. I'm going to comment on their appearance. I might even say, oh my God, look at his ass.
Me too. And honestly, I feel like maybe it's like relationship goals, right? But if you're feeling partnered with your partner and you can notice beauty as an abundance and not a scarcity of like, oh my God, she's gorgeous. Yes, she is.
I've had so many people ask me that question, and we're going to get to the tips and tricks, but what do I do? My partner keeps checking out other people. That's nothing. That means nothing. Check them out with them. Say, oh my God, she's beautiful, or he's beautiful, or whatever it is. Like, I honestly have walked up to couples at a restaurant like, you two are a freaking beautiful couple.
That's great.
And usually people take that well because I'm not a creepy, like, can I join you in bed?
Are you sure?
Only once. Okay. I'm kidding. I did not do that. Shannon,
only once you asked, or only once they thought that, right?
Yes. Clarify.
I could go on and on about this. But the thing that I'm struck by is I do want to know, like, you're talking about like what you did in Costa Rica is part of the tips and tricks, right? Tell us what you think. Well, how should people manage these difficult emotions?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things, and I started this actually when I was trying to rebuild my relationship with my dad, oddly enough, was kind of the same time as I was working on the jealousy. It all just kind of course, went hand in hand. And one of the things that I needed to do with my dad is go back and go, do I know everything? Like, is there stuff? Because I keep telling myself that he doesn't love me. But is that everything? Is that the real story? And so I created this like power of one, ONE, open to new. And then you fill in the blanks with the E, evidence, explanation, examples, whatever it is.
I love it.
But being really open to that, to go, what else could it be? Is there anything else?
Wow.
Like that's one possibility out of 100.
Yes.
Are there others?
Yes.
And it's so hard to generate those new examples when you are dysregulated and you've been telling yourself a story.
It is. I always use this actually with road rage. Like if I have a client who shows up for their appointment and they're like, that fucker, tried to make my life dangerous. I'm like, maybe they had a medical emergency.
What are
maybe
some other
they
options?
lost their dog that day and they're really agitated. It's not about you, right? Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so one example, we had someone who, she was writing out like all men cheat, all men cheat at work. That was just her thing. And then it was going back and going, well, or everybody in my family has cheated. I don't know any men who have never cheated. It's like, is there really no one that you know that has never cheated? So it's just going back into just really being open to those types of things. And then staying in the present moment, that is really hard for us to do because we're either thinking about like the past going, oh, you know what? 3 weeks ago, he came home late and he never really said, we didn't really talk about it. And I know that that's when the new girl at work started. Or we're always worried about what's coming ahead. So for example, we have another conference coming up to the Dominican Republic in 2 weeks. We're leaving. Normally before I would be the entire time, as soon as I knew from last year to this year, every time I'd come up, I'd be nervous and anxious about it. And I'd start telling these stories of all the different possibilities that could happen. So it's really bringing someone back to now and just being like in the present and practicing as much as they possibly can. Like, nope. Oh, I was thinking that old thought. It's not going to help you.
Incredible.
It's no good.
I love all of that.
Or especially the forward talking. Yeah.
And one of the things, and we're talking, when we talked about the amygdala and we talked about like being in the moment and whatnot, I tell people if you cannot do it easily, again, when you said when we're aroused or we're triggered, we're not necessarily able to rationally think about like, I bet something else is going on. I bet they're checking out that bathing suit or I'm checking out, whatever. And it's okay, by the way, they might be checking out their ass or their whatever else, assets. The part that I'm struck by is, if you can kind of take a break from it, that's the other piece I've encouraged some people to do.
Yes.
Like if you're starting to go down that path, if you're likely to be passive aggressive, if you're likely to poke, like that must have been one of your other girlfriends, or, whatever it is, when you go down that path, take a second. Like say, I just need 10 minutes here. Like you can take a little bit of time and inevitably you're going to calm down. It's very hard to maintain that level of intensity. And I always tell people before you start talking, try to get yourself from that 9 or 10 of intensity down to like a 3 or 4. And that's the time that you can actually say what you're thinking and feeling in a way that isn't like, I know this is happening, instead of like, I'm feeling a little shaky at the moment, right? In that tone of voice. Where,
And you'll get a very different outcome if you have a conversation when you're regulated and owning some of your own experience rather than I saw you or you did this or.
And I think apologizing for those moments that we have weak moments and we make our errors and we make mistakes. I mean, it's very interesting to me that you say, I should not be the expert on this. I'm going to scrap this podcast. I'm not good at this.
Absolutely
None of us
not.
are perfect.
Yes.
I think that's one of the pieces for all of my patients. I am sorry to show you my imperfection in this podcast.
I think it's crucial. I think it's important that
we are all human.
Model being very
human.
Human. That's right.
With lots of emotions.
And worthy of love, warts and all. That's
I will be honest too. I kind of beat myself up about this recent event where I kind of went off on somebody because I'm like, that person didn't need it. That person did not deserve it. That there was no warrant to what I was doing, maybe a little bit.
Or no warning that you were starting to feel a certain way, maybe.
Yeah. And so we kind of even developed a strategy for the future. But I think there's a point at which just know that you get to recover. And the minute I said, I'm sorry for letting my emotions get the best of me, this person was like, okay, let's spend time tonight. Like you become a more available person. You said something so important though. It gets draining if it's over and over and over, right? Yeah. So I love those.
Yeah. It does. And you guys talked about the repair. That part is so important because oftentimes when we've had this big explosion, we're in this big argument with our partner, and now our partner's mad, right? They're frustrated. They're not talking to us, which happens a lot of times. So now they're cold shouldering, and you're trying to build it again. And it's like the quicker you can, make the apology, make your part of the repair, say what you're going to do moving forward. Like think about, okay, here's what I'm going to do differently. And then you have to keep moving instead of staying in that wallow of like, oh my gosh, they're still mad at me. And now, because then it goes into but now they really hate me.
Right. Like
now they really aren't going to be
created what I fear the most.
Absolutely.
Which happens, right?
This is why this topic is so massive to talk about because you can get into that place of, okay, now I made them not as attracted to me. And then that spins and spins and spins, like you said.
Mm-hmm. But so, I mean, what you're saying also, it's a really interesting two sides of the same coin because on the one side, without that pause that you're taking when you're feeling that way, I think people stay in, you did this, you're doing this, there's something wrong with you, you're making me feel bad because of the way you are in the world. But then what you are talking about is on the flip side of that, there's a lot of shame maybe that can come with some self-awareness. And then you feel really sheepish that, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm the one. And so also it's like important to notice that fine line that we talked about. Is it intuition? Is it regular jealousy or just using something as like the seeing eye dog? I loved that. Or is this toxic? Is this old, unhealthy patterns? Isn't Shannon amazing? Thank you so much.
Shannon, you are amazing. And it's interesting. We never quite know until someone comes on the screen how it's going to feel. This was so enjoyable. I could go another few hours on this topic. It's, of course, I want you back somehow. And I swear, it's like I found myself thinking, how can we keep Shannon in this loop of our conversation? Because the humanness of this particularly significant emotion that everyone feels, there's no one who has not felt jealous, insecure, whatever it is.
That's right.
It is such a valuable topic. Thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us.
And will you tell our listeners how to find you and plug anything? Tell us where you are.
Sure. If they want to reach out to me, they can just go to topself.com. That's my website. There's free resources on there for them. They can listen to the Top Self podcast. I talk all about jealousy on the Top Self podcast. So those two places they can find me. They can also find me on Instagram at Top Self Coach. And I just want to say a big thank you to both of you, because there are not a lot of people talking about this topic, and not a lot of people want to. And so, but so many people suffer from it. And so they don't have the resources like you all are providing for people. So I just appreciate it, and for understanding and having me on. I appreciate it.
Mutually grateful.
So happy. And thank you again so much for having this really last minute quick turnaround. I feel like we created a really beautiful episode together.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
We told you.
Yeah.
We told you it was
Wasn't
so
that a great
good.
interview? God, I loved her. I want her back.
Yes.
Like, these are the conversations as a clinician that you just want to keep having and having and having.
Oh my gosh.
But we covered so much.
And as we were saying goodbye to her, and she was like, oh yeah, I could totally come back. And have you guys ever heard of retroactive jealousy? And we were like, what?
Round 2. Plus, I want her husband on the podcast to talk about his experience with an insecure and jealous person.
Yes.
And how it is that he's able to say, no, I can affirm you. I know you're working on it. So anyway.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, as you have noticed from our 1.5 years of podcasting, is we really love to see both perspectives, both sides, the person struggling with an issue and the person that's been in relationship with the person struggling.
Right.
And of course, it just brings up all sorts of interesting relationship dynamics and perspectives. We have in our show notes all of the things that Shannon was saying in terms of like where you can find her. So don't forget to look there. And if you loved today's episode, and even if you didn't, make sure to like and subscribe and send the episode to your friends. Did you know you could do that, Doug? Be like, this is a really amazing episode.
Can you share it? Is that what you're doing?
Okay. If you have a friend that you're like,
I'm not technically savvy.
Bruh, you need to hear this episode, send it to them. If you hate your ex and you want to send it to them, you could do that too.
Yep. Or if you hate your ex because they really did realistically make you feel insecure in a really harmful way.
I mean,
like a gaslighting way.
Because you're not paranoid if someone actually is trying to kill you.
And if you have anything else you want to hear about this or other topics, go to we'renotfine.com. We have a place for you to anonymously or identify who you are with any questions that you have, any comments, any questions. Please feel free to let us know. We would be delighted to hear your recommendations on the topics that we cover moving forward. We never end up, being short of topics because there's so many human conditions to talk about. But we would love to hear your very specific question as well as any challenges you're having in your life.
And you could be our next mailbag because we live for it.
Yep.
And as always, find us on YouTube because we're cute, actually. Surprise, surprise.
Yep.
Some cuter than others.
Yeah, for sure.
And find us on social media.
Yeah.
Douglas L. Jensen with an E-N, Dr. Talia Jackson, and We're Not Fine Pod.
And remember, we're not fine.
But at least Doug and I are wearing green instead of filled with green jealousy. Green-eyed monster.
Kermit the Frog.